let's go. Fuck! Ah, shit. This is not going well. Come on! Why are you so strong? Fuck. Why is this so hard? Has this ever happened to you? Hi, I'm Gooba Gooberson, and as you can see, I'm very bad at video games. For years, I struggled to complete the simplest of gaming feats while my friends surpassed them with ease. But that all changed when I found Easy Mode. Easy Mode. With Easy Mode, gaming's a breeze. That big bad boss giving you trouble? Nerf it. Enemies spotting you too easily? Not with Easy Mode, they're not. And it all comes at the low price of your dignity and respect from fellow gamers. So what are you waiting for? Try Easy Mode today. Hi gamers. I don't know what that was. Today I want to talk about a controversial topic in the gaming community, and that is video game difficulty. This is a topic that comes up pretty regularly, but always gains a ton of traction when a new From Software game drops. If you're not familiar, From Software is the developer behind the Dark Souls series, Bloodborne, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, and most recently Elden Ring. All of these games have two things in common. They're all incredibly difficult, and they all only have one difficulty setting. That means that every player will face the same level of challenge no matter their skill level or experience with the games. Now, on one side of this debate are gamers who believe adding difficulty settings would make these games more inclusive and accessible to new players, while on the other side are longtime Soulsborne fans who believe changing the difficulty would go against the developer's intent and therefore take away from the overall experience of the game. I do have an opinion on this, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but first I'd like to go through a very brief history of difficulty in video games and the stigma of playing on easy mode. Throughout the last 50 years, yes, I said 50 years, video games have gone through many iterations of how they handle difficulty. In the early days of arcade cabinets, game levels were designed to increase in difficulty in order to keep players playing longer and, in turn, spending more money. Games for home consoles were also made especially challenging so that it generally took players more than 3 days to complete the game, meaning there was incentive to purchase the game rather than just renting it. The first example of a video game difficulty setting, at least that I can find, is from 1977 on the Atari 2600. The console itself had a difficulty switch, which allowed players to choose between B, for stinky little beta bitch, I mean beginner, or A for super alpha giga chad, or advanced. This allowed players to customize their gaming experience to fit their skill level, and over the coming generations, more and more game developers would implement their own difficulty options. Now, when it comes to how these difficulty settings work, I would say the most common is if you took different mechanics from the game and gave them each a slider to increase or decrease the amount of that thing. So playing on easy mode, let's turn down the number of enemies, enemy attack damage, number of obstacles, and increase the player's attack damage and health. And for the harder difficulties, just do the opposite. Different games obviously have their own iteration of this, but I would say this is the standard method for balancing difficulty. And as a principle, I would say this method is fine. It gives more experienced players the option to challenge themselves, while giving less experienced players, or players who just want to experience the story, an easier and more streamlined playthrough. But not all games are created equal, and this mechanic is not always implemented perfectly. Some games do a bad job of balancing the difficulty levels, like Halo 2 for example, which raised the difficulty for their legendary settings so far beyond the previous game that most players today consider it broken. Enemies on Legendary are so aggressive and their trigger fingers are so fast that players have to resort to one-on-one shootouts behind cover in order to win. There are also games that actively discourage and even mock players for choosing to play on lower difficulties. There are a ton of examples of this, but probably the most famous is Wolfenstein: The New Order, where the lower difficulty settings are literally called "Don't Hurt Me" and "Can I Play Daddy?" Sorry. And they're accompanied by a picture of the protagonist either looking scared or literally wearing a baby bonnet and sucking on a pacifier. Definitely kind of shitty, but overall, I would say this is pretty harmless. There's also the infamous chicken hat from Metal Gear Solid 5, where if you die too many times, the game will offer to let you equip the chicken hat, which makes it so enemies don't notice you the first time they see you, so it makes sneaking around easier. The only consolation is that now Solid Snake is wearing this goofy chicken hat. But if you continue to die while wearing the chicken hat, the game offers to give you the little chicken hat, which looks even more ridiculous, but makes you basically invisible. Definitely making fun of the player, but again, as long as you have a good sense of humor and can laugh at yourself, this isn't going to ruin the game for you. Where I believe games mocking players crosses a line, though, is when a game offers an easy mode, but then gatekeeps the later levels on that difficulty. For example, in Twisted Metal 2, if you choose to play on the easy mode, the game literally stops after the first boss and a screen pops up that says, "No losers allowed beyond this point. You must switch to medium or hard to continue." Okay, fuck you, man. Why even offer the easy mode if you're only gonna let me play a fraction of the game on it? At that point, you're just wasting resources, including the easy mode, all for a get good joke, and it's fucking lame. For me, I believe the difficulty I choose to play on directly pertains to my intent with that specific game. Now, I don't mean to brag, but for most games on my first playthrough, I choose to play on either normal or medium. I've been gaming for a long time, so I feel like I can usually handle the challenge of the normal difficulty. But if it's a game I'm struggling to progress in that doesn't have a super in-depth progression system that I can grind to upgrade my character, then I have no qualms about lowering the difficulty so I can move on and experience the story. And as an adult with a full-time job as well as a content creator, I don't always have the time to fully commit to mastering one game's mechanics, so I'll choose to play on a lower difficulty so I can finish the game and move on to the next game in my ever-growing backlog of games. It also depends on what I'm trying to feel from playing a specific game. I will be the first to admit I am god-awful at sports games. I've never been good enough to win in PvP, so I usually have to resort to playing against computers. And if I am playing against a computer, I don't want to squeak out a last-second come-from-behind victory. I want to fucking embarrass them. I want to set records on their home turf and piss on the logo as I leave. If EA made that possible, I'd buy Madden every year. And the reason for that is it feels good to be good at something, even if I know the cards were stacked in my favor. As I discussed at the beginning of this video, there is a bigger issue that arises whenever people talk about video game difficulty, and that is whether or not games that do not have an easy mode should have one. There are some gamers who believe every game should have an easy mode, and to that statement, I don't really agree. I think it's more complicated than that. I believe it's perfectly acceptable to play a game on easy mode if that's an option the developer intended for you to have, but some games are designed to be the same experience across the board for every player, because you're given the tools to tailor the game to fit your skill level. Let's use Elden Ring as an example, as it and its Soulsborne cousins are usually the primary focus in this debate. These games are designed to be incredibly challenging for both new players and seasoned veterans, not just from a gameplay standpoint, but for the narrative as well. The concept of putting a weak character up against insurmountable odds is the entire premise of the game. You as the player have the ability to unlock quote-unquote easy mode by grinding runes and leveling your character to fit the playstyle best suited for you. Or you can just use a magic build, which according to FromSoft fans is basically easy mode. And with it being open world, Elden Ring gives you an option that no other FromSoft game can: the ability to move on from a challenge and do something else. Because previous FromSoft games were mostly linear, if you were stuck on a boss, you kind of had to backtrack and grind enemies you had already faced until you're ready to face that boss again. But with Elden Ring, if you're stuck on a boss, just leave. Go explore and find other ways to prepare yourself. There's no narrative sequence tying you to that specific fight. Another thing to consider when talking about an easy mode in FromSoft games is how it would affect the PvP aspects of the game. All of these games have hints from other players spread all across the world, and even give you the option to summon other players to help you with difficult fights. But if the difficulty is set to easy mode for one player, can they only summon help from other players on easy mode? And if so, could people manipulate this system? I can't really answer this, as I am neither a game developer nor smart, but I assume this would complicate the way the game is played. The Actman makes some great points about this in his video about easy mode in Dark Souls. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Although From Software games are usually cited as the main source in the argument for games to include an easy mode, they aren't the only massively popular games that have fixed difficulty. Breath of the Wild, GTA 5, Hollow Knight, Metal Gear Solid 5, and many others don't have adjustable difficulty, but don't receive nearly as much criticism for it as FromSoft games, or it's at least not as public. Now, it could be because FromSoft games are so heavily focused on the challenge that it feels like it's not inclusive to new players, But I think the same could be said for Hollow Knight. It may not seem like it at first glance, but the combat in this game is relentless, and if you don't have a firm grasp on the controls and the mechanics, you're gonna get your shit rocked. And if we're being honest, Elden Ring is really just Breath of the Wild Dark Souls edition. They both start you off in a tomb with almost no instruction and one primary goal. Elden Ring's being, repair the Elden Ring and become Elden Lord. And Zelda's being even more simple, beat Ganon. There's no difficulty selection screen. The game just tells you the end goal and says, okay, go on. And you, as the player, decide how to get there. You can go out and complete all the shrines, do all the side quests, and make yourself ultra powerful, or just go straight from the Great Plateau to fight Ganon. I don't recommend the second option, but you have it. And the reason this structure works without a difficulty setting is the player is not confined to one specific path. You choose the best method to make the game easier for yourself, rather than a difficulty slider doing it for you. Another topic that kind of gets lumped into the conversation on video game difficulty is accessibility in games. Some people believe video games being difficult or not having a difficulty setting makes them inaccessible to some players, but I feel like we need to clarify a few things in that regard. Ease and accessibility are not the same thing. Accessibility in games means giving players options that make the game playable for them based on their circumstances. This could be giving the player the ability to remap the control layout, extensive language and subtitle options, multiple colorblind modes, options that make the game playable for people with disabilities. Now, if we're talking about accessibility in From Software games, then you have a more reasonable concern. These games historically have not had the most substantial accessibility options, and Elden Ring isn't really an exception. But when looking at gaming as a whole, more and more games each year are putting a focus on accessibility by giving players a wide array of gameplay modifiers, and that is a good thing. The Last of Us Part 1, for example, carried over the award-winning accessibility catalog from Part 2, while adding a ton more gameplay modifiers that allow players to change the game in subtle or drastic ways depending on their preference, many of them available right away. Branching off of the accessibility discussion, there's one more topic that I need to address. This video is going to be so long. In regard to video game difficulty, which is the inclusion of an assist mode in games. Assist mode is more or less a gameplay modifier menu that allows players to tweak certain aspects of the game without fully changing the game's difficulty setting. Several games over the last few years have had their version of this, but I think a lot of the credit for the idea falls on an indie game from 2018 called Celeste. Celeste is a 2D platformer that has heavy emphasis on jumping, climbing, and mid-air dashing to avoid obstacles. In its standard state, Celeste requires precise timing for jumps and dashes and can be incredibly difficult, but its developers, despite having a clear vision for the game and its difficulty, chose to add an assist mode so that every player can have a good experience. With assist mode, players can change the speed of the game, the amount of dashes their character can use, the stamina of their character, and even give themselves invincibility. Now, it's worth noting that before you can activate assist mode, the game tells you that it was meant to be played without it so that you can get the intended experience. But also, the developers understand that every player is different and they may need the assist mode to experience the game at all. They're not shaming the player for decreasing the challenge, they're just letting the player know that the challenge was part of their intent. This strategy for managing difficulty, at least to me, feels like the solution that gamers have been looking for. Instead of selecting the difficulty for the entire game right from the start, give players the freedom to start the game how it was intended and then make adjustments that are specific to them. So how do we solve the ever-present dilemma of video game difficulty? Should every game have an easy mode? Should difficulty settings be replaced by assist modes and adjustable modifiers? Or is there another solution that we just haven't thought of yet? Honestly, I don't fucking know, dude. It's taken me like 2 months to write this video because every time I think I have a firm grasp on video game difficulty, I see something else that changes my perspective. Every game is different, just like every player is different. So I don't think there's one set method for every developer to follow when balancing the difficulty of their game. I think developers need to make the game they want to make and then give players the options to tailor the game to their needs. And as gamers, let's all just agree to play games how we choose to play them and let everyone else do the same. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Also, like and subscribe and follow us on Twitch, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Gooba and Jetpack. See you next time. Bye.